record. And with that, Erna, I would love to hear your introduction to your book.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you all at the end of, I'm sure, a rather long day. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I always enjoy these opportunities to talk because it makes me think. And you wouldn't believe it, but every time I do a talk like this, my talk's different because your thinking changes. So Kathy started off asking me, why did I write the book? And if I answer it today, I will say, well, this book has been long in coming. It's not been a snap decision on my part. I grew up in South Africa during the apartheid years. And my father was a sociologist. And so I grew up in a family that was very, very entrenched in social justice. My dad was an active advocate for voting rights for all people. And so we grew up in a household that had a lot of contact with different cultures in South Africa. And one of the things that always came up in discussion in our family was how we can talk to people but not communicate to them. So it was something we really struggled with from a young age in terms of saying hello and having a conversation with somebody from different racial groups, or even your own for that matter, because there was also great division in South Africa between white people at the time. And so I remember one time in particular, Thomas Luckman, he was a very well-known sociologist and a very big friend of my dad, came out from Germany to visit. And I was talking to him because I was really fond of him and talking to him about my disillusionment in speech therapy. Because I said to him, I'm working in stuttering at that time. I was teaching stuttering at the university. And I said, what does it help if I get somebody to be fluent? Because still they don't make friends. It doesn't necessarily help them to become socially integrated. And his attitude at the time was, well, if you can make him to stop stuttering, you've done a lot. And he was a very mechanical type of German, And I remember, at the time I was very frustrated with him because surely life is more than just being able to eliminate stuttering. If we are, communication therapists, then we should be able to help people to become socially closer to people, to develop meaning with them. So that was something very prominent while I was growing up. And then as part of my professional career, I started the Center for AAC at the University of Pretoria in 1990. And obviously it was the first place of its kind in Africa because nobody really paid attention to people who couldn't speak. And I became very aware of the fact that communication is much more than speech. And so the non-verbal piece became a very important part of my thinking. And Lyle Lloyd at the time, who's also passed away last year, was instrumental in helping me sort of develop the approach, although we always had some differences because Lyle was very, very sort of data-driven and technologically oriented, and I was the one that kept saying yes, but it was a very great influence in my thinking because of his critical input. So in 2009, I accepted a job at Indiana University. And again, this time being in America was new for me. I spoke with an accent, as you can hear. Many of the students didn't understand me. And once again, I was made very aware of just how difficult communication is. You know, I could talk and they could understand me cognitively, but it's incredibly difficult to really develop a development of, you know, sort of a meaningful relationship with people when there is no emotional contact. And I think this is the divide that we're talking about also in the field of AAC. So when I went into the schools and I saw all this technology, I was very impressed until I started realizing, but hey, why are our kids so isolated during break times? Why do they eat by themselves? Why are they all in self-contained classrooms? And so my work in the last 12 years in the States is largely centered around working in schools and the therapists and teachers. So while I was at Indiana, I lost my husband, who came with me from South Africa, and it was a tremendous shock to me because we basically were walking and he just fell down one day. And I was left there thinking, what on earth am I going to do? My children were one in the UK, one in South Africa. And after I sort of came around, sort of started realizing, but one of the most difficult things, and I also alluded to this in the preface of the book, that it was almost the way people showed their kindness that for me was in some respects the most difficult. The way people tried to support me was for me really difficult because it wasn't supportive. And I started realizing again that what I'm dealing with is people having routinized interactional patterns of dealing with things, and that we're missing each other, and that the personal context of meaning making is not necessarily happening, although we assume it's there, but it's not really there. We're not really communicating with each other. So until such time as I actually said to him, please, I can't eat. Don't bring me food because it's not helpful to me. And at that point, you know, I started thinking that, you know, we started to understand each other better in terms of the way forward and the ability to sort of really reach out and do more than exchange messages. So what I'm talking about in this book is not really just for AAC users. And this is what I keep saying to teachers and therapists. It's really about us. First and foremost, if we are able to communicate, then the chances are much higher that the AAC users we're talking to can experience it and can start understanding what is communication really about. So after that experience with my husband, I realized, you know, I need to rethink my life. And that's when I decided that this is the time to write this book. And so I took a sabbatical, and that's actually where the basic work started. So if you ask me what is the prime contribution of this book, I would say that it is about what happens between us. It's not about what does the child do, the person who can't talk. What can you or can't you do? That's certainly part of it. And it's also not so much about what am I doing as a teacher. It really is about, or the therapist, or what do I do right or wrong? That's not what it's about. It's about what happens in an interaction. So for me, the idea of video recording is pivotal to understanding communication, and you have to do it soon after your interactions. So whenever I go into schools, I go into a classroom and I videotape what people are doing in a natural situation, and we move from there in order to start, you know, sort of improving the communication. This is pivotal for the book because it really is about meaning making. And we have to be able to look at the moments in our interactions that reflect meaning making between me and whoever else I'm trying to help. Because that is the gem that we can use in order to then elaborate our communication, to get the person involved in a meaning-making process that really impacts how he learns and how he makes friends and becomes socially close to others. So this is not about, and I'm not saying that there is no relevance in looking at the child's skill or the teacher's skill. Those things are all relevant. But the crux of the matter that we've been missing is really looking at what happens in between. And that is what I talk about, meaning making. And I use the term new nuanced meanings because it's about using language in just that slightly different way that makes it special to be with you and that wants me to come back to be with you. And so this is where this book is at. And you'll see I try to make very clear that in the first 2 chapters, that meaning making is not about participation only. Participation is exchanging messages. You exchange, I exchange. It's not about 50-50 participation. It's about a huge part of that is what we haven't really paid much attention to, and that's engagement. And this is how does participation integrate with engagement to help you and me develop something that is so joyful and meaningful in our interaction together. So it's about integrating verbal and non-verbal. It's not to do with intelligence. It's not only to do with cognition. In fact, I keep saying to people, you don't need to be very bright to be a good friend. Truth be told, many times very bright people aren't good friends. And what we're about in communication is really developing friendships and the ability to relate to what people are saying, which is how we learn and how we are able to generalize in the end. So those are, for me, the core issues in the book that I think I try to isolate in terms of augmenting the field as we have developed. We've made great strides in technology. We've made great strides in getting kids to communicate messages by finding it on the devices and speeding up the speed and stuff like that. But in the process, very often we've introduced a distraction. And that even though the skills can be there, it has separated me from the kid. And now I think we need to sort of start thinking about how do we take what we've achieved and move it around so that meaning making becomes something that we focus on in order to really try and deal with the isolation of our kids. Okay, so that's enough, I think, as a background about the book. And if you've got questions, you can surely sort of ask them. But finally, I just thought I will take you through the book and just tell you a little bit about the different segments now I thought about the book that might help you in your reading. So, firstly, I think it's important to read the preface because that's where I was at the time I read the book. You will see that I dedicate the book to my dad, who was a very influential person in my life. He died the year before I published the book. And then, as far as the book itself is concerned, it's got 3 parts. The first part deals with the theoretical side of it. In other words, meaning making. What is meaning making? What are the components? Engagement, participation, how do they work together? And I developed some sort of way in which to write engagement and participation so that we can start understand about how do these things work together. But the first priority is always to start with, was the meaning developed or wasn't there? So we start off with meaning making and saying, okay, are there elements in this interaction that was really sparkling, that I think we made contact? And what did that constitute? And then from there we start saying, okay, fine, now let's break it down. What did that participation look like and what did the engagement look like? And as I said before, the idea is that there certainly isn't 50-50 participation. It's not about 50-50 verbal participation. Now you take a turn, now I take a turn. It's about listening, watching, being able to read what the other person is saying. In fact, there was a very nice video that a mother posted on a Facebook group for parents of children with severe disabilities the other day. And when I saw it, she was talking to the kid and the kid was just communicating back without speaking. It was just basically noise making, but the kid's 5. And I thought to myself, I would so much like it, but unfortunately she didn't respond in time for me to be able to show you. But I thought that would have been a really nice video for us to start off with. Okay, so chapter 1 is social closeness, relationships and communication. That tells you my orientation. It's about friendship. It's about getting close to people and the ability to just be with someone. And as the basis of any communication or learning. The second one is engagement and participation. I'm sort of looking close at those components. And then the third one is about research that we did in 2 contexts, in South Africa and in the US. And both of these contexts are really good schools. And what was interesting was to see how differently people actually interacted. But again, I think there's some messages for us there in terms of, are you so task-oriented or are you also able to balance that with a relational orientation towards the kid? And the last chapter there is competence, AAC competence. What do we understand? What is it? What do we mean when we talk about AAC competence? And for me, clearly, AAC competence is the ability to develop meaning with another. So it's a little bit different from where Janice Light and other people come from. And I think that, again, it augments where we're coming from. It's really focusing on what is the ability to be with other people and how do we, as therapists and teachers, actually help that develop, because that really is core in terms of learning and generalization of what we actually learn. So part 2 of the book then focuses on AAC intervention. The first, chapter 5, is really talking about the principles of a meaning-making approach. And it starts off by saying, truth be told, if you've never been in a relationship that is, where you've experienced meaning-making, how can we expect you to really communicate? You can exchange messages, but you can't necessarily communicate because you're not experiencing it. And it's not such a difficult thing to do. All we need to do is to help parents to do the kind of stuff that comes naturally, to babble with their kids, to interact with their children without imposing certain societal rules or certain sort of strategies. Chapter 6 is case studies. A couple of case studies that I worked through with people. Chapter 7 talked about empathetic communication. Now that is a big topic that obviously is closely related to what we're doing. I've done quite a bit of work on empathetic communication. Suffice to say that empathy is much more than perspective taking. It's not just about being able to put yourself, understanding where the other person is coming from. The very important component of it is emotional. It's emotional sort of resonance and your ability to sort of really emotively resonate. And this is, I think, to a large extent what we often miss because we're running, in such a rush. We've got to be accountable, etc. We want to get the stuff done. And in order to do that, we became so sort of automatized that we almost can't allow ourselves to really emotionally resonate with our kids. And I think we pay a price for that. And I think our kids do too. So chapter 8's partner training. How would you do partner training that in a different context like this? And if you look at that, you will see that one of the things I'm trying to say is less forceful. Looking at how parents can play with their kids and moving from the spark that you see in terms of the meaning-making moment and how can we really help people to sort of broaden out from there. Chapter 9 is the only chapter that is focused on disability per se, because I mentioned severe dementia there. And now I can tell you that I was criticized for actually adding this chapter. But there's a reason why I did, because again, it also stems from personal experience. My mom, before she passed away this year, had very serious bouts of dementia. Times she didn't speak. And I'm very close to my mother, so I became very aware of how important it is to actually keep communication going with her, even though she was not speaking and very confused at times. I think the bottom line is that in terms of dementia, what we know is that you can get quite close to people with dementia on an emotive level. The problem is that they don't share the same reality as you and I. And so it's a really good place for us to look at in order to realize, and we've done quite a bit of training with high school kids, with interacting with people with dementia in order to help them to sort of become emotionally more resonant. Because you're not able to compensate by being highly sort of, cognitively entertaining and that kind of stuff. So I put it in because it is in a way very different from the rest of the book. But I think it adds because it really accentuates the other side of the coin, and that is, here is diagnosis that in fact really does away with the cognitive piece. But that doesn't mean you can't communicate, because there's a world in terms of what you can do with emotional and basically just hearing my voice. My mom's face just lit up when she heard my voice. She didn't necessarily know my name. So there was meaning developed there, but it was in a different way. So, and I think that's very important for therapists to realize, is that, and when we talk about ALS, lateral sclerosis, progressive motoric problems, I've often heard people saying, that no, but there was very good communication between the wife and the husband, even though the husband was so ill. And the reason for that is because, yes, and I do think there's a very deep level of meaning making, but it's not dependent on the cognitive or the necessarily, what we traditionally look at as Bloom's taxonomy, and it's different type of interpersonal meaning making, which is what life is about. So the final chapter in part 2 is on digital communication. It's really about how do we communicate with each other in social media, what role can it play, and yeah, and I think that is, I'm very interested in that. I think it's got great potential, although also obviously significant limitations, like we all learned this last year from the coronavirus interactions. The last part, part 3, is about future perspectives. And I really just take a couple of points here and say, okay, fine, what's time about? You know, when we talk to AAC users, we always say, oh, it takes so long, you know, it's boring. They have to pick up speed. And the truth be told is, if you share an interaction with somebody, if you are on the same sort of, if you resonate with them, time disappears. And you can focus on, what are you trying to tell me here? And again, that is an incredibly important part to convey to communication partners, that it really disappears. I mean, it becomes, time pressure becomes an issue when I'm pressurized and, you know, there needs to be verbal exchange so I can get done. But if you really want to be with someone, that really becomes a less of an issue. We need to think about that. And we need to think about what is nuanced, new nuanced meaning. What does it mean? How do I use a word that is more meaning, that makes it more meaningful in the situation? What happened around it? So yeah, in a nutshell, I mean, there's some other things too. I mean, I forget now what all is in it, but I think that for me is just about the core issues, you know, in the book.
Lovely. Thank you. That was a beautiful walk through your book.